Welcome, sinners. I'm Jason,
And I'm Rebecca, also known as Emily Sin.
and this is the Sanctuary of Sin podcast. We will cover everything delectably sinful, from kink and queer culture to cults, sex positivity, and everything in between.
Let's get sinful. Welcome back to part 3 of Wrath, the demonisation of women's rage and sexuality. So if you've been following along with us so far, in the first episodes we kind of covered the beginning of the origins of hysteria, kind of starting at about 2,500 years ago up until about the 15th century and the beginning of the witch trials in Europe. Then in the second episode we kind of covered a lot about how the witch trials began in Scotland and some of the kind of surrounding punishments to do with that, and the kind of links between it and hysteria, and how in much the same way that science and medicine kind of gave way to religion and like exorcisms and then moved back again to science, hysteria kind of moved into witchcraft and then back again to hysteria again, which we're going to be covering a bit of today. So going back to the Renaissance, throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, physicians kind of re-uptook the goals of science and had to kind of pick up where things left off at the beginning of the Dark Ages. So we're kind of back to the kind of ancient Greek and Roman kind of half physician, half philosopher theories, and the kind of humoral theories surrounding medicine at the time.
Aye, so we've just taken a short break for a couple of 100 years.
Yep.
And now we're rewinding back to kind of where we left off. The same sort of like pseudoscience-y theories that were on the go before the witch trial started.
Yeah, but with some modern twists. So Ambrose Paré, who was from 1510 to 1590, was France's leading physician. He suggested that it was not just virgins and widows, but also married women who abstained from sex that were also at risk of being afflicted by this disorder.
Yeah.
So the combination of leading scientific minds at the time, along with kind of new humanist theories on philosophy that were starting to kind of come out and not really be linked to religion in terms of how we looked at what was moral, like what was involved in having a good life and being like a good man. Like a lot of these theories looked at that without kind of looking to God as an answer or looking to God for a moral framework of that.
Aye, so religion's sort of influence in medicine is starting to kind of wane a wee bit.
Yeah, medicine and kind of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
As well as they were starting to kind of look at the anatomy of the brain. Like there was a lot more kind of focus on like autopsies and actually getting like a good look at what was going on inside people that they kind of had kind of touched on, but not was still in this moral grey area before. Yep. And it still was at this time, but it was starting to become more commonplace.
So we're starting to get into some more sort of like modern hard science sort of medicine and stuff.
So all of this kind of led to them looking at what the causes behind illnesses were in a different way than they had before. And this kind of led to like a more general consensus that hysteria and the root cause of it was mental illness rather than it being specifically like the womb was causing it.
Yeah.
Again, this was disputed within the scientific community. It's just that this was a theory that was starting to rise within the time period. So there were still people that were against this and still going along with the kind of treatments and stuff that had always been, but there was kind of new scientific development and they were starting to look at it in a new way, and this was kind of slowly but surely kind of spreading out across over the next couple of 100 years after that. So as we kind of discussed in the last episodes, by the kind of end of the 16th century, magic had overtaken heresy as like enemy number one of the day.
Yeah.
They kind of got rid of all the competition, and now they were kind of trying to root out anybody who had anything to say against the church, and therefore were labelled as magic or witches or Yeah. And what this kind of led to was physicians of the time becoming subordinate to inquisitors. So the medical profession was kind of shackled by the church in a
Aye,
sense.
they were kind of
Um,
working for the church.
Yeah. A kind of example of this is Giovan Battista Condronce, who was 1547 to 1628. He was a physician and a theologian who kind of criticised the medical therapies of the time that were aimed at treating hysteria, that were kind of based on like Galen and Hippocrates' theories. So he gives like a detailed description of what the treatment, the kind of common treatment that was in line with these. Midwives, recalling Galenus and Avicenna's teachings, took care of the hysterical women, introducing the fingers in their genital organs in order to stimulate orgasm and semen production. The treatment for him must be practices by the spiritual guides. So he was basically saying that this was like against God, and these women were just like blasphemous, and like that by making them like orgasm, that wasn't like solving the problem.
I mean, I think it was certainly solving a problem.
At least somebody was managing it.
Yep.
Do you know? But he was like, no, they must turn to God. They must turn to the spiritual guides. And this kind of became quite like a commonplace thing at the time, where women who had been previously been treated by like medical professionals, like helping them to orgasm, to became like kind of inquisitors and preachers, like exorcising them.
I know which one sounds preferable to me.
And then there was kind of people that existed that thought they were like one and the same thing. So
Right.
yeah. Gotta let the demons out.
Is that what the kids are calling it these days?
Yeah. Aye, so he kind of identified the origin of these behaviours again in the fumes.
Yeah.
But also in polluted water and in the suggestion of the use of certain substances that induce visions and pictures. So, like drugs, basically. And worryingly, in
Physiognomy.
Which was a wild ride for me. I kind of wish I could go back to the time where I didn't know what this was.
Aye, it's kind of racist pseudoscience.
That's still kicking about to this day. So it's kind of like the granddaddy of phrenology, if you've heard of that. It's this kind of theory that like people's facial features or characteristics kind of define their character.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of lines up with like this image people have of a witch as well, like comes from this, where it's like there's certain ways that people can look that make them evil or make them morally like immoral, or and this even at this point still had roots within like racial features being having determined kind of characteristics attached to them,
and this kind of thing's still like you can see it in sort of like racist caricatures and stuff, and especially from like kind of old political cartoons and things. It's it survived quite a long time.
Yeah. And it has roots in science, or pseudoscience, as the case may be. But yeah. So this was used against women also. So I think this was the case of, like, for them, what they seen as like an ugly woman was then immoral and blah, 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 other things attached to it. So on a much lighter note, we had the Dutch physician Johann Weyer from 1515 to 1588 intended to prove that witches were mentally ill and needed to be treated by doctors rather than interrogated by ecclesiastics.
This is certainly sounding better.
Yeah, definitely. So in 1563, he published the De Prestigiis Demonium, which was a step-by-step rebuttal of the Malleus Maleficarum, which was like the kind of the witch book.
Yep.
The step-by-step witch hunter's guide. So he kind of went through that and wrote his kind of answer to it, kind of showing that it was based on nonsense.
I love a step-by-step rebuttal.
Yeah, it's great. Upon kind of looking through his works, it was found that he was like a very religious man himself. So it wasn't that he was out against the church, he just could see that what was being done to these women was wrong and felt that there was a health concern there rather than something that to do with like witches and demons and
This seems to be like a rare moment of clarity
Yeah,
in
and-
this 2,500 years of just horrendous despair.
yeah.
And even more surprising that this is like a religious man
Yeah.
that's been able to see through this. Potentially somebody that's like, taken the messages from the book and
Yeah.
kind of divorced that from the sort of politics of the church.
Aye, it still took 100 years for somebody to actually clap back at least in an official capacity. But as we'll remember for episode 2, it was expressly written within it that anybody who didn't believe it was themselves essentially possessed by the devil, and it was the devil that was making them not believe the writing. So I can see why it took so long.
Took a wee while for the kind of the seriousness of that charge to kind of fade a wee bit.
Yeah.
That maybe the words in this old book aren't quite as real as it made it.
I mean, I don't know if I would go that far. Literally only because the reason that he was so invested in this was that he was being called as an expert witness in witch trials that were still being held on the basis of this book that he actually wrote against. I feel like it does show a sign of the times in the sense that they were willing to have somebody who was like so against like witchcraft be involved in the court proceedings and stuff.
Aye, I think for this guy in particular, having that 100 years distance from this book coming out, it sort of lends this. Having that amount of time sort of enables him to go, that was quite a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Is this still the correct way of thinking?
Yeah.
Whereas, like, more contemporary stuff tends to have people in a kind of like a tighter grip.
Yeah, that's fair. I only meant like because people were still dying based on the words of this book.
Mm-hmm.
That they hadn't shifted that far away from it. Like, I get what you're saying. I'm not.
But there's now space for dissenting opinions.
Yeah,
as the kind of
there's more space for debate at this point. Yeah, we've actually got a transcript from one of these trials that he was involved in, imploring the court to end their practice of, quote, torturing and killing women. Don't you know that these poor women have suffered enough? Can you think of a misery anywhere in the world that is worse than theirs? If they do seem to merit punishment, I assure you their illness alone is enough.
That is truly refreshing.
Yeah.
So far, this guy seems to be like the biggest good guy in the entire kind of story of hysteria. And certainly the most empathetic towards women.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a tough one, right? It's a tough one because he just doesn't want them to be burned alive. But he's still claiming that there is something like mentally wrong with them. It's hard to call an illness that was made up for the purpose of like controlling women, and somebody claiming that rather than them being in line with the devil and deserving to be burned, that they actually have this disease in which they just need to have like loads of orgasms and shag men all the time and be good wives. Like, I'm not saying one's better than, I'm not saying that it's worse than that, but it's hard to still call that like empathetic in a sense, unless he fully believed it.
just by the standards of the time, though, like,
Yeah.
not necessarily like big picture,
Yeah.
just, and all we've heard so far, this guy seems to have the least burning hatred for women.
Yeah. I think especially within the context of the time where, the kind of symptoms associated with the suffocation of the womb were kind of starting to get seen as like demonic possession, madness, and witchcraft. Like, but he was still seeing it as madness to an extent. That's what I'm.
Yeah.
It was at least seeing that wasn't fun for them, but he was still viewing it that there was something like wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
Aye, to kind of like roughly summarise, like the fact that there was this kind of scientific development going on didn't really take away from the kind of enduring demonological element of science at that time. It was just that they were looking more at the reasons, but
they were still sort of running parallel to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aye. They were still very much going hand in hand in a lot of spaces at the time. But people were kind of starting to fight against this kind of view. So in a witchcraft trial in 1602, English physician Edward Jordan explicitly mentioned hysteria's connection to menstruation. He was also summoned as an expert witness to the court. So the case that he was covering, there was a woman on trial for essentially causing hysteria within her neighbour's daughter.
Oh, right, okay.
So, like, there was a young girl who was having, the usual convulsions and swoons and all the kind of things of the day. Like, she was in pain of some description.
Yeah.
And they thought that their neighbour was, like, sending, like, spectres to, like, harass her and, like, cause her these pains and cause her these convulsions and make her emotional and hysterical.
Yeah.
And Edward was kind of arguing that the problems that this young girl had were from natural causes and were not, in fact, from the devil himself. Nobody else agreed with. Like, the women did end up going and getting punished and getting sent to the pillory and all the rest of it. But this kind of acted as quite like a good drive for him going forward, where he kind of took what he'd learned and took the stuff that he'd seen and became at the kind of forefront of countering claims of demonic possession. He published the monograph, A Brief Discourse of a Disease called the Suffocation of the Mother, with the hope that its edifying message would help spare other women.
So we are starting to see some, like, the tide sort of turning in a in a very small sense, where there are a few people out there going, don't think this is to do with demons and witches and kind of paranormal stuff.
Yep.
This is a problem based in this world.
Aye, so there was kind of two ongoing arguments. There was the kind of demonological versus like health argument as to where the kind of root cause of this was going on. But there was also this like physical versus psychological kind of argument going on at the same time. And these two were very much kind of almost directly synonymous with each other, with the kind of psychological going hand in hand with the demonological, with the exorcisms and the possession and the like it being an act from one person causing this to another kind of thing was like a bit more kind of on the psychological spectrum, whereas the physical and the health were like a wee bit more aligned, where it was like the wandering womb or the suffocation of the womb as it had become by this point. And the focus on it being specifically because women had a uterus, and this was the kind of root of what was causing the problems.
It's kind of as though the psychological aspect sort of granted a bit of credibility, like scientific credibility to like what the church had to say.
Very much so. And I find it quite interesting that debate is almost still ongoing, even now.
Yeah.
No, the demonological part kind of died out, but all the rest have still been kind of the theories of the day for a lot of like gynecological conditions and stuff are still very much like, oh, is it just that people have had trauma? Is it just that there's an actual physiological thing going on? Like, there's still no really got to the root of the answer for a lot of things. Endometriosis being one of them, where it's still kind of they don't know what causes it. And the theories are kind of widely debated of either side of this kind of scale, I guess.
Right.
Aye, like even now there's so much of, like even people that I know who have had health conditions as women, and it's been put down to like psychosomatic pain and stuff like that, rather than them actually trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but is it as common as it has been in my life with people I know? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, there are still kind of lasting biases within medicine that
Yeah.
don't treat everyone equally, or their pain or their experiences of pain.
Yeah. Aye. So during this era, there was kind of a lot of chaos going on with a lot of people being in disagreement about what the root cause of hysteria was. And because of that, it was getting diagnosed under like a couple of different names. There were some new kind of diagnoses that popped up during this time, including nymphomania, which was referred to as madness from the womb fury, or uterine fury. So kind of regardless of the name, all of these were kind of under an umbrella. Like it was quite kind of dependent on, I don't even want to say your behaviour, because they were all seen as kind of immoral. They were all seen as like something that was caused by somebody's behaviour, and they were kind of used interchangeably almost at the time. But it was this just kind of like willful moral depravity was the kind of shared like symptom that between them all. Outbreaks were even said to have occurred in like convents with like nuns and stuff like that. This was like something that was getting discussed quite a lot back in the day, because obviously the cure was sex.
Yeah.
And nuns weren't having sex. It meant that this was, I don't even know why they were in there, to be honest, but like the physicians that were encountering this. But this was a thing that was happening up and in the country in nunneries. And French physician Claude Quillet exclaimed, "These poor little devils of nuns, seeing themselves shut up within four walls, become madly in love, fall into a melancholic delirium, worked upon by the desires of the flesh, and in truth, what they need to be perfectly cured is a remedy of the flesh." I'm pretty sure Claude just wanted to shag some nuns.
I think we're seeing a bit of the fetishization of nuns and like the, the sort of forbidden nature of that.
Yeah, because surely God's protecting them. Do you know?
You would think. You'd think if they were that devoted to God, he'd be looking out for them.
Yeah. But I think this is like where we see things getting complicated, do you know, because as the kind of demonological side of things goes out, it becomes less about God and more about the psyche.
Yeah.
And with all these kind of humanist approaches and stuff, like people are starting to not kind of attribute things to God and faith in the same way as they were. And that is kind of leaving people vulnerable to that weren't before, like nuns, do you know, where they probably would have had the protection of being part of the church and being under God's care to kind of abstain them from like them getting pulled into all this nonsense that was going on. But that as that's starting to ebb, they're no longer safe, essentially.
Yeah.
And are likely to become nymphomaniacs.
This all kind of feels a bit like this sort of like a male fantasy.
Oh,
that, these nuns that are locked up and not able to have sex.
All they need is a penis and they can't have one.
And they're absolutely crazy for it if only they, weren't being held by these rules. And
even grimmer, in the most extreme cases of nymphomania, some even recommended that afflicted women be strapped into straitjackets. Probably so they couldn't touch themselves. I feel like this is...
probably.
It's like a form of chastity, essentially, at the time.
There's been other examples of kind of straitjacket type devices to keep people from touching themselves.
Yeah. So 17th century physician Rivieris exclaimed, Womb fury is a sort of madness, arising from a vehement and unbridled desire of carnal embrace, which desire disthrones the rational faculty so far that the patient utters wanton and lascivious speeches. So in Arnulfo de Mont's 1753 encyclopedia entry on uterine fury, it kind of talks about the fact that it's a disease which is a delirium attributed to persons of the female sex, which is a boundless venereal appetite, impels violently to be satisfied, to seek immodestly the means of achieving that end, to say the most obscene things, to do the most indecent things to excite men who approach them, to extinguish the ardour that is devouring them, to talk and be preoccupied by nothing but thoughts relative to that purpose, to act only to obtain for themselves the relief the need for which presses them, to the point of trying to force those who resist the desires they manifest. And it is principally by this last symptom that this sort of delirium can be considered as a sort of fury, which has the characteristics of a mania since it is without fever.
Yep, so this is where we're seeing it's kind of going from... It's branching out to not just being like women in discomfort and pain to women who are interested in sex.
Yeah. And the fact that all of these things are all treated and kind of like come under the same names all the time is wild. Like,
there's been this sort of blurring of the lines between
like actual physical health conditions, actual mental health conditions, and then just what they deem to be as behavioural conditions.
Yep.
And moral conditions.
Because women can't possibly be horny and interested in sex.
Yeah. Because they're little delicate flowers.
Yeah, something wrong with them.
Yeah. Who are frigid in nature. And anybody that's existing out with that has something wrong with them. So nymphomania was a term that was still being used up until about 1980 when it was taken out the DSM.
That's wild.
But there's been multiple instances of it kind of been trying to just be renamed and replaced even as recent as 2010.
Yeah.
It's still seen as like a mental health disorder and for some people, even in modern day. But probably not in quite the same way as it was back then.
Aye.
The way that they kind of understood it was that there was like different stages of uterine fury, and that if you got to it early enough, sex was enough to cure it.
Yeah. Okay.
And this point is basically horniness. Like, we were kind of talking about this when we were looking at it. Like, to me, it seems like, because how they viewed it was like the same as hunger. Like, it was a similar kind of physiological desire as hunger, which probably isn't too far off how we understand things today. And that it's a need that needs to be sated. And it's going to kind of fluctuate depending on different stimuli and different like features like time and blah 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 blah. But they seen specifically uterine fury as one, like a hunger that couldn't be sated. So it was like if they did have sex and then were still like horny afterwards, but
nothing to do with inadequate men that didn't really care about their pleasure.
Yeah, or like the inability for the majority of people to either make people come or come at all because they were living in a society that like subjugated women to the extent that they were probably too fucking stressed out to be totally honest.
Aye. Couldn't possibly be the fault of men though.
No.
Couldn't possibly.
No, it was put down to a couple of faults. So the first being that if it was early stages, the cure was sex. So the cure was getting married. Like the same rhetoric that we've heard a million fucking times throughout this. If the illness was attributed to moral causes, then it had to be handled with care, because anything could heat the patient's imagination. Like, it wasn't like a physiological thing, it was specifically a moral and behavioural thing at this point. and they could only be surrounded by people of the same sex who were only to speak to them about their moral, religious, societal duties, and refrain from discussing like anything sexual with them.
Bore them out of it then.
Yeah, basically. But interestingly, and why I left this in, is there was a lot of medications that were kind of supplied at the time, including antispasmodics, which, if people who were just in pain were also being treated for uterine fury at this time, and it was because of period pain and period cramps or endometrial cramps, antispasmodics would have worked, because that's a thing that's still given, because it basically stops the muscles from like cramping to as much of an extent. It would have worked, at least for the pain side of things. I just found that wild. Like, they keep getting like so close to the truth. Like, I don't understand. Does antispasmodics stop you being able to come? Like, that's not something I've ever came across, heard about, experienced myself when I've took them. Like, why was that included? Do you know, like, it's interesting.
Maybe to stop all the fits and convulsions and...
Yeah, well, this is what I mean,
That's probably been the kind of impetus for including them, and just by accident they have actually helped out in a way that was different than what was intended. But...
yeah. So the other kind of, if the cause was because of a swelling of the salivary glands and vessels in the vagina, so otherwise they got really wet and like they got turned on, so the like the vessels all filled with blood and therefore had like a higher temperature than what they deemed to be acceptable.
Yeah.
You know, the warming of the loins and all that. Which I never even thought about that's where that comes from, but you learn something new every day. Or for me, several, but yeah. So they would use injections or like enemas to like cool down the area. They would do bloodletting, so they would just remove blood from the area in order to like chill them out. Folk even talk about having like cold showers and that today, if they're like horny. Like, that has got roots in this. There's still quite a lot of stuff that's kind of came from them just wantonly experimenting on people in the name of science.
We must stop these women from being horny.
Douse them in water. Get the leeches. Speaking of leeches, that was one of the other remedies, was actually putting leeches on the anus. I don't really know why or how that helped.
It would certainly be a turn off for me.
Yeah, maybe it was a turn on for the doctors. I don't know. Like, but yeah, that was also a thing. They were also doing like baths and stuff as well, which is nice. As well as changes in their diet. So, if you've heard anything to do with Kellogg before, which we've mentioned a few times on here, he wasn't the first person to come up with this, which I find very interesting. So the thought was that kind of meat and game and spicy foods and anything with flavour, basically, or any like alcohol could like unbalance the humours but also excite the patient, and that things needed to be bland and boring and like in order to kind of
keep the humours balanced and keep the patient unexcited.
Yeah. Like, they thought that all of these things could like also heat the loins. So like spicy food would make you horny as well. Yeah.
What a bland time to be alive.
Yeah. No, for the doctors. But they were having great fun. So there was also a kind of more innocent version of nymphomania that started kind of popping up at the time, which was called love sickness. And it tended to be more like the kind of upper class women that had the love sickness, and kind of lower class women that had nymphomania. It had roots in both hysteria and the kind of melancholy sadness that'd been proposed by Galen. So they were still kind of clinging on to these theories for like thousands of years before at this point. They thought young women were especially susceptible to such disorders, and there was loads and loads of paintings kind of depicting both nymphomania and lovesickness throughout the 17th century, as well as a lot of like kind of thesis topics on covering both. So it was something that was kind of imbued within the culture. Like this wasn't just something that was getting discussed by scientists. It was something that was kind of being almost romanticized, and it was throughout how people viewed women at the time as well. In the late 1700s, a German physician called Franz Anton Mesmer found a method of treatment for his patients based on a fluid that he identified within the body called animal magnetism, which to me just sounds like a 70s porno. I feel like it's wild to find out that this term has roots in like
supposedly science
and medicine.
I've heard some bits and pieces about Mesmer and animal magnetism.
Yep.
It's wild.
Yeah. So the kind of idea was that people could essentially be hypnotized by a practitioner kind of moving this fluid throughout the body, which is where this kind of like floaty hands and moving them up and down over somebody kind of comes from, is that they believed they were moving this animal magnetism fluid throughout the body and kind of eliciting changes within them based on that. Hypnosis kind of grew from it.
This doesn't feel too far from the sort of the whole kind of humours theory. And, you know,
it's just an adaptation of it, which is where I feel a lot of the problems come from. Is that like everything's like that? Like it's just. So during the Victorian age, most women actually carried a bottle of smelling salts in their handbag for if they ever swooned, which was kind of, I feel like this is where we most identify this term from, was like from the kind of Victorian times where like women were just so emotional they could faint at the mere sight of blood or like whatever. There was this kind of
the sort of the era of women being like fragile and
aye, because even then like the kind of the ideal feminine woman didn't work, so they would do all their work like dusk and dawn when everybody had went to bed and stuff like that, because they couldn't appear to be doing any work in order to still be seen as attractive. There
couldn't be even the slightest suggestion that they were anything other than like
a picture on the wall, essentially.
Ladies of luxury that with nothing to do with the working class. There was no
to the extent that like working women were pretty safe on the streets and stuff, because like people didn't tend to see them as women, because they weren't like living up to this kind of unrealistic expectation of how like ladies of leisure existed in the day. That it was actually probably a pretty safe time in some ways. So the smelling salts in the handbag was still based on Hippocrates' theory that the womb had a sense of smell, and that like this would awaken them because it would like frighten the uterus back into doing what it needed to do, essentially.
That's crazy that this theory was still, still kind of had credibility this late on. That,
it's just a reminder. So Hippocrates probably would have came up with this roughly about 400 BCE, so 2,200 years previous to this. And this theory was still having an active impact on people's daily lives.
That's absolutely unreal. Absolutely unreal.
So there was a rise in women being admitted to mental asylums for treatment at this time as well. And the treatment of such kind of varied between different asylums. Like, it wasn't just this kind of concrete thing. Like, different doctors were kind of just left to decide what they thought was best.
Aye, this kind of just felt like a time of sort of unchecked experimentation.
Yeah. But because some of the most common advice earlier in this period was for women to have sex and to have orgasms as a method of curing it, it was really common through loads of them for women to be pelvically like massaged with the use of either hands or with vibration to some extent, which kind of led to the invention of the vibrator, which is a bit of a controversial myth, or I don't even want to call it a myth, because like there definitely was vibrators back then. Like there's ones in museums from the kind of late 1800s that you can go and see that were like clockwork, because everything was they were just making everything
like mechanized.
Aye, like mechanising everything back then for easiness. There was some doctors' complaints of like how much time that it took.
Couldn't be just that their technique was poor, or the setting was uncomfortable, or
consent tends to play a factor, and yeah. Not that, of course, but it was fine because they just made machines to do it. So most of these treatments were still kind of based on the idea that the woman was responsible for causing these afflictions. And this didn't really begin to develop much further until Freud and Charcot began to attribute the illness to the brain, using hypnosis as a potential cure.
A good old friend Freud.
Yep.
And his reasonable theories about things.
So at least officially, or at least what has been acknowledged within like kind of medical documents and stuff, the kind of sexual nature of these treatments was not realised, or wasn't explained as such. Even though to us today, like,
of course they're that's sexual. What?
You're literally making people come. What? How can that be seen as no sexual? It's just part of a hard day's work, you know.
I think it's just the kind of prudishness of the time playing a factor.
I think it was because they were getting to do what they wanted, but still wanted to hold on to like their reputation and authority.
Aye, that what you're saying isn't different from what I'm saying. Like,
oh, I understand. Like, because society was so prude, like, it would have affected their reputation and authority if it had got made out in any way
to be sexual. Yeah.
Aye. But it's not to say that the doctors weren't aware that that is how it could possibly be construed, because some of them had even advocated for like hurting the female patients or causing them like some kind of uncomfortableness alongside what they were doing as a way to kind of like balance the scales, I guess.
Aye, as just a cover.
Yeah.
For...
like, this isn't fun. This isn't supposed to be enjoyable. Like,
yep.
Yeah. But I don't know how much or often that was actually going on. It was just something that was kind of offered as like a solution to this potentially being seen as sexual in nature. So moving on to 1880 in France, Jean-Martin Charcot, who first took a modern scientific sense to the female-only disease of hysteria, lectured his medical students, showing them photos and live subjects as part of his lectures. He believed that hysteria symptoms were caused by an unknown internal injury affecting the nervous system rather than necessarily the womb, and felt that hysteria could be with both men and women.
Okay. Another kind of slightly different way of been looking at this.
Yeah. So one of his medical students was none other than Sigmund Freud, who was the founder of psychoanalysis. Freud, working with his partner Breuer in Austria, kind of developed upon Charcot's theories and wrote several studies on female hysteria between kind of 1880 and 1915. So he believed that hysteria wasn't like a physical injury. So it kind of disagreed with his teacher on that front, but felt that it was like a kind of psychological scar that had happened because of some kind of trauma or like repressed memory, or like there was kind of something in someone's past that had caused them to have these symptoms going forwards.
Yeah.
Specifically in females, he felt that this kind of psychological damage was a result of the Oedipal moment of recognition, which, if you're not familiar with, is basically the time in all little girls' lives where they realise that they don't have a penis and that they've essentially had it castrated from them, and spend the rest of their lives seeking another, whether that be through marriage or by giving birth to someone with a penis, in order for them to get their like metaphorical penis back.
This is the whole penis envy thing.
Yeah. So that trauma in and of itself is enough to cause hysteria, which is why it's more common in women. That was his kind of theory.
I personally feel like Freud had a lot of problems and did a lot of projecting.
And took way too many drugs.
Yeah.
And those three things together with like a bit of respect and authority within the scientific community, that's a bad mixture.
I don't feel like he had much business telling anybody what was wrong with him.
No. So speaking of, he's got quite a famous kind of case from 1905, which was quoted Dora, an analysis of the case of hysteria. He felt it was really important when discussing our symptoms to kind of hear all about our kind of sex life and our past sexual life, including like everything to do with like the organs and the functions, and quoted here, "I will simply claim for myself the rights of the gynecologist." So he was conducting a very thorough examination of his 18-year-old patient Dora in order to get to the bottom of what was going on. Gross.
Yeah.
It's all gross. It's all very, very
I think
gross.
Freud's just a bit of a creep.
Yeah. So the symptoms she was suffering from were like difficulty breathing, a nervous cough, and hysterical unsociability. Which sounds like kind of anxiety to me, to be honest.
To be fair, I think I'd be hysterically unsociable if I was surrounded by people like Freud.
Fair. Same. Through his analysis, he's discovered that he's discovered her psychological scar, which is when she was 14, her father's friend, Herr K, suddenly clasped the girl to him and pressed a kiss upon her lips. And he said that this was surely just the situation to call up a distinct feeling of sexual excitement in a girl of 14 who had never before been approached, which is... There are no words.
I mean, it sounds like it more likely would have brought up feelings of being violated.
Yeah, which it did. That's what she described, that she kind of felt revulsion, and Freud put this down to a reversal of effect, wherein it had flipped the script in her head, where she would have felt this sexual excitement at the time, but
she got confused by being
a woman,
by getting a fright, and what an absolute load of nonsense.
I believe that during the man's passionate embrace, she felt not merely his kiss upon her lips, but also the pressure of his erect member against her body. This perception was revolting to her. It was dismissed from her memory, repressed, and replaced by the innocent sensation of pressure upon her thorax. So I've misunderstood this. Basically, he was saying that a man kissing her on the cheek, and normally for a 14-year-old girl, that would elicit sexual excitement.
Right.
And that because she was feeling revulsion, it must be that he put his dick on her hip and she didn't like that bit, but she's repressed that and replaced it just with the memory of the kiss. And that's where this revulsion has came from, is from this repressed memory.
And that persists as a feeling of pressure.
Yeah.
Yep.
But there's just been this kind of long-standing thing throughout this as well of like women just generally not being believed that like their pain, their symptoms, they're not to be trusted. They're going to get in the way of their own like help, essentially.
And there's something wrong if you want men, and there's something wrong if you don't want men.
Yeah.
Like there's this Goldilocks amount of.
They change the goalposts all the
Yeah.
time as well. It's to keep people in this state of fear, in this state of conformity. And anybody that goes out with that too far is getting sectioned, is getting sent to the asylums, is getting burned, is getting forcibly caused to orgasm.
So you better just comply with whatever the last thing a man told you to do was.
Yep. Basically, like it puts everybody in this state of like they're going to go along with the last thing that they heard.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the truth now. That's what's expected now. And Freud kind of covers this as well, where, and speaking about Dora and what she kind of believed about her own illness, so what she brought to the table, rather than listening to her, he said, "It is of course not to be expected that the patient will come to meet the physician halfway, with material which has become pathogenic for the very reason of his efforts to lie concealed. Nor must the inquirer rest content with the first no that crosses his path." Basically, you don't need their consent. You don't need to listen to them. Anything they say is part of their problem that they're having and therefore isn't credible. And you're the only person that knows best and has to get to the bottom of it, and regardless of what they tell you. Sounds a wee bit like the witches interrogation thing again to me.
Yeah.
And that, like, there's always an answer that means that the person is lying.
Aye, that's the same attitude dressed up in new clothes.
Yeah.
Like it's.
Over the next kind of 50 years or so, hysteria was starting to kind of get phased out. Especially after the kind of First and Second World War. It was a term that was used kind of synonymously with like unexplained emotion.
Yeah.
And because there was a lot of men in the wars that were coming back with kind of symptoms that couldn't be explained, emotions that were misplaced, like a lot of conditions that were kind of linked to the war, kind of had hysteria in the name, like hysterical limbs, and I think this is what kind of started to see it get pushed further to
the
the
crosshairs
background.
kind of started being turned on men,
Yeah.
and suddenly that was not a position
They wanted
they
to be
wanted
in.
to be in, so the whole thing had to just disappear.
Aye. Like, hysterical paralysis was happening quite often as well.
All right,
It's just, so, a soldier torn between facing the fear of death or the shame at being thought a coward may develop a hysterical paralysis of a limb. Sickness being a legitimate way out of the conflict.
right.
So, it kind of got turned on the system as well.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
it was something that, because it was so arbitrary and so, like, grey areas, like, they didn't really have a real set of symptoms to go alongside
it. Was quite
because
easy
it was
to claim it and
Yeah.
then use it as an excuse not to be drafted or to
Yeah.
be sent
So at that
to
point,
war.
it stopped getting seen as, like, a real thing as much. Because it was, it was getting used to kind of go against the system that had been using it to control. I think as well with there kind of being the introduction of new terms like depression and anxiety and stuff, there was this kind of natural progression of hysteria being diagnosed less and depression and anxiety being diagnosed more, to
Things
the point
with
where
a clearer kind of set.
yeah.
Things with like a sort of clearer set amount of like symptoms and things.
Mhm.
Like there's
Aye. I think because it ended up being a bit of a catch-all for pretty much everything, anything that they just couldn't explain became hysteria. As they started being able to explain these things, hysteria was getting used less and less.
Yeah.
Because it was like, oh, she's no hysterical, she's got endometriosis. Oh, she's no hysterical, she's got this other gynecological condition. Oh, she's no hysterical, she's got anxiety, she's got depression, she's got nymphomania. But not all of them were like in a positive way,
Yeah.
but it was starting to kind of get broken down into the subsects of the things that had been making it up for millennia previous to that.
Took them long enough.
Yeah.
It seems to have been a journey paved with lots of men that hate women.
Yeah. As was expected of them of the time.
Yeah.
Which I'm in no way defending, but I don't know, I think this is part of the problem where, in a vacuum, would that have been the case? Or was it just that was how society was at the time? And still is to an extent,
It does feel as though there has been more progress made in the last 200 years than the 2000 years before that.
Yeah.
In terms of this specific kind of topic, there's...
I feel like that's kind of true everything though, eh?
Aye, but... It feels like it took us 2,000 years to get
up to where we were at 200 years ago.
To achieve an inch worth of change, and then we've kind of gone miles since then.
Yeah.
Still not far enough.
No,
but
there's still people that are alive today that have been lobotomized and shit.
Yeah.
But we have still came a long way.
I feel like we're both in need of a lighter
topic
subject going forward. At least for a little bit.
Cool, well, thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us, you filthy little sinners. We hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
We're keeping this podcast deliciously ad-free, so if you want to support what we do, head over to our Patreon and join our Church of Sin.
If you're craving some new personally recommended kink gear, check out our website, thesanctuaryofsin.com, for all your naughty needs, and use the code SINPOD at checkout for a 15% discount.
Got ideas, feedback, or just want to tell us what made you blush? We'd love to hear from you.
You can find all our socials, including Instagram, Twitter, and FetLife, on our Linktree, which is linktree/thesanctuaryofsin. Thank you for sinning with us.
And don't forget to tune in next time for our next confession.